loyalty, honor, compassion. American children are told numerous tales about key figures who embody these traits. Honest Abe and the allegory about George Washington not lying about cutting down a cherry tree help teach young citizens what they should expect from their role models, and how they should behave themselves as citizens. But elsewhere, Chinese children may learn about the strength of Mao Zedong as evidenced by his swimming the Yangtze River in the 1970s, which signaled the start of the Cultural Revolution. The same traits of loyalty, honesty, and compassion are used to tell another story for Chinese children. Our cultural perspective can paint a very local, very specific picture of the world and anchor people to a very specific narrative. These narratives, often tied and attributed to historical figures, serve as fairy tales in which some historical figures are depicted as heroes and others as villains. This rearrangement of history into more black and white terms serves to simplify often complicated narratives that involve complicated figures and to protect against the changes in an ever-changing set of values that are used to judge their actions. In this video, we will take a look at prominent historical figures that are typically portrayed as heroes or villains and contextualize their biggest achievements in light of their lives and the period in which they lived. Mother Teresa is for many a symbol of generosity, caring and compassion. Her father died when she was 8 years old, and by age 12, historians report she was convinced that she should commit herself to religious life. When she was 18, she left her home and family to join the Sisters of Loreto in Ireland, and learn English in order to become a missionary. She never saw her family again. She arrived in India in 1929 and took her first religious vows on May 24, 1931, after which, she assumed the name by which she is better known now, Teresa. After spending some years teaching at a local school, she became increasingly disturbed by the poverty surrounding her in Calcutta and, in 1950, she founded Missionaries of Charity and decided she could best serve the poor by living with them. After Teresa's death in 1997, the process of beatification started. The process of canonization requires the documentation of a miracle resulting from the intervention of the prospective saint. In 2002 the Vatican recognized as a miracle the healing of a tumor in the abdomen of Monica Besra. According to Besra, she was cured by the intervention of Teresa, who applied a locket with her figure to the R where the tumor was. However, her husband and some of her medical staff attributed the healing of the tumor to medical intervention. Dr. Rajan Mustafi, who told the New York Times he had treated Besra, said that the cyst was caused by tuberculosis, and that the woman's recovery was not a miracle, but a result of the medication she had been taking for 9 months. Her husband agreed, saying that his wife had been cured by the doctors and not by any miracle, and going as far as calling the miracle a hoax. Besra said that her medical records, including sonograms, prescriptions and physician's notes, were confiscated by Sister Betta of the Missionaries of Charity and officials at Balurghat Hospital, where Besra sought medical treatment, said that they were pressured by the order to call her cure miraculous. During Teresa's beatification and canonization, the Vatican studied published and unpublished criticism of her life and work and found no obstacle to Teresa's canonization. Francis canonized her at a ceremony on September 4, 2016 in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City. Tens of thousands of people witnessed the ceremony, including 15 government delegations and 1,500 homeless people from across Italy. It was televised live on the Vatican channel and streamed online, with multiple celebrations occurring internationally. At the time of her canonization, however, many reports came out shedding doubt in Mother Teresa's character and deeds. Although she will be remembered for the good work she did in Calcutta and elsewhere, Mother Teresa also had many flaws. One of her flaws was misplaced loyalty, which would result in great harm and suffering to the victims of a pedophile priest. Documents said to have been obtained by SF Weekly suggest that Mother Teresa knew one of her favorite priests, Donald Maguire, was removed from ministry for sexually abusing a boy in 1993. Nonetheless, Mother Teresa actually urged that Father Maguire be returned to active ministry as soon as possible. In addition, Mother Teresa was found to often exaggerate her good deeds. She is on record as having said that her order fed between 4,000 and 9,000 people in Calcutta every day, but an Indian official, in a deposition submitted before the Committee for Beatification of Mother Teresa, stated that her soup kitchens in Calcutta did not feed more than 300 people daily. Mother Teresa also considered her charitable work to be necessary in order to solicit donations for her real priority, which was the propagation of the Catholic religion. It is estimated that Mother Teresa's missionaries of charity received over $100 million a year in donations, but that most of the money was directed to convents and missions for the propagation of the Catholic faith rather than the provision of medicines. Mother Teresa directed that no strong painkillers be provided for the terminally ill, only allowing mild medications such as aspirin. She established hostels for lepers, but refused to buy the antibiotics that would have cured them. Colette Livermore, a former nun with the order, says that the sisters were refused quinine, placing them at risk from malaria. However, despite being surrounded by poverty, Mother Teresa lived well. When traveling, which she did often, she always went in the first-class section or in the private plane provided for her use by Charles Keating, who was later convicted of fraud. She sought out and used the best medical facilities around the world when her own health required treatment, and even had her bedroom, in the Order's mother house, fitted out with expensive, sophisticated cardiac equipment because of her heart condition. Winston Churchill was born on November 30, 1874, and is better known today for being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 1945. During the Second World War, and again from 1951 to 1955. Ideologically an economic liberal, imperialist and conservative, he was for most of his career a member of the Conservative Party, of which he was the leader from 1940 to 1955. He joined the British Army in 1895 and saw action in British India, the Anglo-Sudan War, and the Second Boer War, gaining fame as a war correspondent and writing books about his campaigns. As First Lord of the Admiralty during the First World War, he oversaw the Gallipoli campaign but, after it proved a disaster, he was demoted to Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. He resigned in November 1915 and joined the Royal Scots Fusiliers on the Western Front for 6 months. In 1917, he returned to government under David Lloyd George and served successively as Minister of Munitions, Secretary of State for War, Secretary of State for Air, and Secretary of State for the Colonies, overseeing the Anglo-Irish Treaty and British foreign policy in the Middle East. After 2 years out of Parliament, he served as Chancellor of the Exchequer in Stanley Baldwin's Conservative government, returning the pound sterling in 1925 to the gold standard at its pre-war parity. A move widely seen as creating deflationary pressure and depressing the UK economy. Out of office during the 1930s, Churchill took the lead in calling for British rearmament to counter the growing threat of militarism in Nazi Germany. At the outbreak of the Second World War he was reappointed First Lord of the Admiralty. In May 1940, he became Prime Minister, replacing Neville Chamberlain. Churchill oversaw British involvement in the Allied war effort against the Axis powers, resulting in victory in 1945. After the Conservatives' defeat in the 1945 general election, he became leader of the opposition. Amid the developing Cold War with the Soviet Union, he publicly warned of an Iron Curtain of Soviet influence in Europe and promoted European unity. Re-elected Prime Minister in 1951. His second term was preoccupied with foreign affairs, especially Anglo-American relations and, despite ongoing decolonization, preservation of the British Empire. Domestically, his government emphasized house building and developed a nuclear weapon. In declining health, Churchill resigned as Prime Minister in 1955, although he remained an MP until 1964. Upon his death in 1965, he was given a state funeral. Widely considered one of the 20th century's most significant figures, Churchill remains popular in the UK and Western world, where he is seen as a victorious wartime leader who played an important role in defending Europe's liberal democracy against the spread of fascism. Also praised as a social reformer, historian, painter, and writer, among his many awards was the Nobel Prize in Literature. However, he has been criticized for some wartime events, notably the 1945 bombing of Dresden, and for his imperialist views and comments on race. According to Richard Toye's book Churchill's Empire, young Churchill took part in what he called a lot of jolly little wars against barbarous peoples in Africa, and believed they were violent against the British not because the Brits were invading their land, but because they had a strong aboriginal propensity to kill. Later, when he joined Parliament, Churchill advocated more war against minorities, claiming that the Aryan stock is bound to triumph. Of the Kurds, who tried to gain independence from Britain, he said, "I am strongly in favor of using poison gas against uncivilized tribes, it would spread a lively terror." Then there was Gandhi's quest to free India from British rule. Churchill didn't like that, calling for Gandhi's murder shortly after he rose to prominence in the late 1920s. It wasn't just Gandhi, though. Churchill openly admitted, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion." He didn't mellow out as he got older. In 1943, in between rousing speeches about never surrendering, he refused to help India survive a severe famine that ultimately killed around 3 million people. Churchill blamed the Indians, saying it was all their fault for breeding like rabbits. Gandhi was an Indian lawyer, anti-colonial nationalist, and political ethicist, who employed non-violent resistance to lead the successful campaign for India's independence from British rule, and in turn inspired movements for civil rights and freedom across the world. Born and raised in a Hindu family in coastal Gujarat, western India, Gandhi trained in law at the Inner Temple, London, and was called to the bar at age 22 in June 1891. After 2 uncertain years in India, during which he was unable to start a successful law practice, he moved to South Africa in 1893, to represent an Indian merchant in a lawsuit, where he stayed for 21 years. It was in South Africa that Gandhi raised a family and first employed non-violent resistance in a campaign for civil rights. In 1915, aged 45, he returned to India. He set about organizing peasants, farmers, and urban laborers to protest against excessive land tax and discrimination. Assuming leadership of the Indian National Congress in 1921, Gandhi led nationwide campaigns for easing poverty, expanding women's rights, building religious and ethnic amity, ending untouchability, and above all for achieving Swaraj or self-rule. The same year Gandhi adopted the Indian loincloth, or short dhoti, and, in the winter, a shawl, both woven with yarn hand-spun on a traditional Indian spinning wheel, or charkha, as a mark of identification with India's rural poor. Thereafter, he lived modestly in a self-sufficient residential community, ate simple vegetarian food, and undertook long fasts as a means of self-purification and political protest. Bringing anti-colonial nationalism to the common Indians, Gandhi led them in challenging the British-imposed salt tax with the 400 km Dandi Salt March in 1930, and later in calling for the British to quit India in 1942. He was imprisoned for many years, upon many occasions, in both South Africa and India. Gandhi's vision of an independent India based on religious pluralism was challenged in the early 1940s by a new Muslim nationalism which was demanding a separate Muslim homeland carved out of India. In August 1947, Britain granted independence, but the British Indian Empire was partitioned into 2 dominions, a Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. As many displaced Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs made their way to their new lands, religious violence broke out, especially in the Punjab and Bengal. Eschewing the official celebration of independence in Delhi, Gandhi visited the affected areas, attempting to provide solace. In the months following, he undertook several fasts unto death to stop religious violence. The last of these, undertaken on January 12, 1948 when he was 78, also had the indirect goal of pressuring India to pay out some cash assets owed to Pakistan. Some Indians thought Gandhi was too accommodating. Among them was Nataraman Godse, a Hindu nationalist, who assassinated Gandhi on January 30, 1948 by firing 3 bullets into his chest. Gandhi's birthday, 2nd of October, is commemorated in India as Gandhi Jayanti, a national holiday, and worldwide as the International Day of Nonviolence. In 2018, a Gandhi statue was removed from a university campus in Ghana due to activists there and in Malawi being angry about his early writings. In 1903, when Gandhi was in South Africa, he wrote that white people there should be the predominating race. He also said black people are troublesome, very dirty and live like animals. Some people argue that, later in life, Gandhi gave up his racist views and became an advocate for inclusion and against discrimination. That included gender discrimination. Gandhi championed women in politics. But he was also obsessed with his own celibacy. In his late 70s, before he died at 78, he slept naked with his grandniece when she was in her late teens. He said he wanted to test his willpower to abstain from sex. Nowadays, most people would call that abuse. Some question whether the young female was capable of giving consent as a minor to a man who was so revered and so much more powerful than she. Historical figures are people. As people, they have flaws that become more visible due to their fame and historical importance. However, there is a tendency to simplify the way in which these historical figures and their achievements are taught in schools and represented in the media. This simplification too often tends to overlook the many failures of historical figures in favor of a saint-like depiction. Although this is understandable in some ways, it also does a disservice to the victims of said figures, and the younger generation might be tempted to look back and yearn for what is often painted as the better times or good old days, in which men were braver and more courageous, and women were more virtuous and reserved. This, however, appears to never have been the case. The people of the past, however distant they might seem to be, were in fact, just like us. It is unlikely that those who passed of malaria in Calcutta looked at Mother Teresa as a gift God sent to the earth. In fact, it is unlikely that many of them even believed in God. Similarly, it is unlikely that many of the Indians living under British rule looked at Winston Churchill with much love either. And, despite all the good to which Gandhi might have contributed in India, the harm he caused to some is still alive in the memories of many. What about you? We would like to know your opinion. What other historical figures tend to be represented in a more positive light, despite having a shady past? Like this video, leave a comment and subscribe to this channel for more content like this.